Hey everyone, Meet Kevin here. The crisis in Afghanistan is horrible. It's so horrible, yet many of us in America feel disconnected. And I'm going to start this video off by showing you how relatable this crisis really can be. Take a look at this. Nicole was one of the service members who was killed in the blasts at the Kabul airport. When we see photos like this, we see men and women in uniform, and there's a disconnect between us and them. We're separated by that uniform. But what I'm going to show you is where that separation breaks apart. We're going to scroll past Nicole in uniform. We're going to go to Nicole with her friends, or Nicole with her friends and family here, friends here, relationships, selfies of Nicole, Nicole. And all of a sudden, this crisis in Afghanistan, in my opinion at least, feels a lot more relatable. That everyone who's affected by this crisis in Afghanistan isn't just a service member, isn't just an Afghan. They're people. They're humans, just like us. They have friends and families and go on vacations and go to the gym. And so it's with a heavy heart that I say, yeah, we lost 13 American service members. 18 others were wounded. 170 people died in these blasts at the Kabul airport. And now we have a very big crisis on our hands. In fact, after the blasts in Kabul, there were many reports on social media. I even mentioned them on this channel about talk of other explosions. In fact, even a much larger explosion happening in Kabul, and a lot of uncertainty over whether this was another attack or what this was. It turns out things have gotten so desperate that rather than evacuate or remove products or armaments or equipment from Eagle Base, the final CIA outpost outside of the Kabul airport, Americans leveled it by blowing it up. And I'm not exactly sure whether it was a drone strike or placed explosives or what, but the CIA's base outside the Kabul airport, Eagle Base, was really, really important because it was used to train the Afghan intelligence community and the counterterrorism forces on how to keep the Taliban at bay and how to actually fight. They were one of the last units fighting when the Taliban came. The Eagle Base was an extremely secure unit. I mean, picture massive 10-foot walls, giant compound. You drive through the first gate. If you got through the first gate, 3 more outer checkpoints to get into the actual facility. And this was a very important facility. And now the facility's been leveled because we've completely lost control. Now, excuse me, it's worth noting a little bit of background because this comes up in the comments section and there tends to be a lot of confusion around a little bit of background. And so I'd just like to set a little bit of groundwork. It's worth noting that the agreement signed by Donald Trump in February 2020 called for all Americans to leave by May 1st. Now, of course, there's been a lot of partisan bickering that Trump would have left differently and under different time frames and so on and so forth. But it's very important to know that Joe Biden did extend this deadline to the end of August. Now, it's worth noting that this deal was a deal between the Taliban and the United States. It was not a deal that included the Afghan government. The deal made promises by the Taliban that they would cut ties to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Now, Donald Trump's deal did not actually include enforcement measures that said if you don't cut ties, there will be a follow-up problem. It was just a promise, which is something you would expect generally under like a ceasefire. And after this deal, attacks against American forces in Afghanistan did stop from the Taliban. The purpose of the deal was really just to get the attacks to stop long enough for the Afghan government and the Taliban to be able to forge some form of a new deal together. Not for the Taliban to just sit around and wait until the United States left and then take over the Afghan government. That was not the goal, obviously. The Afghan government had issues, though, negotiating with the Taliban because they blamed the Taliban for executing journalists and leaders of their military, which obviously executions like this would make negotiating hard, and it's certainly also hard to negotiate with a group like the Taliban when there's no clear one leader. You have a lot of factions that operate under the umbrella of the Taliban. And so it's no surprise that a deal was not formed. And so then, of course, when the United States military withdrew, what you were left with was a non-deal between the Taliban and the Afghan government. The Afghan government already suffering from high desertions, low recruitment, poor morale, theft, like straight up just fraud, embezzlement from leaders of the Afghan military from the Afghan military. So massive amounts of mistrust. And certainly when the leaders left and bailed out of the country, it doesn't leave a lot of motivation for an already sort of broken force to stand and fight and risk their lives for a government who doesn't have a deal with the Taliban and whose leaders have left. This makes a lot of sense. So most of the Afghans who did not want to be caught appearing to even be part of the military, in many cases just left weapons and equipment behind without even a fight. And in some cases this makes sense because the Afghan government had been propped up so miserably, almost as if on toothpicks, that who would want to stand on a mountain of toothpicks to fight for toothpicks? It makes no sense. So on an individual level, I certainly don't blame individual Afghans for bailing and trying to protect themselves and their families and their daughters and their sons or their parents, grandparents. But what you're left with now is this insane political crisis that's actually breaking America. Even more so than America was broken through COVID, which we thought America was divided during COVID. We thought, whether you are on the left or right, I believe that 95% of us watching this video believed that at least Joe Biden would return maybe this sense of like somewhat more calm, right? Like a little bit more calm, certainly more quietness coming out of the White House. I mean, Joe Biden creates a lot less noise than Donald Trump did. And this isn't to get political. It's just, I think that's what everyone believed, whether you voted for Biden or whether you voted for Trump. But what's really happened here with Afghanistan is we've actually become substantially more divided. Now you've got things trending on Twitter like Biden must go, followed by photos of Joe Biden with his head in his hands, responding to reporters or other pictures or videos that encourage people to question Joe Biden's competency. And I'm not here to defend or to claim or make any kind of claim about Joe Biden's competency or his alertness or whatever. I'm here to comment on how devastating this Afghanistan crisis is for America and how it's actually breaking America. See, Joe Biden says he directed military commanders to take every possible measure to prioritize protection. There were two retaliatory, or at least one retaliatory strike against ISIS-K members that killed 2 members. This was apparently a Hellfire missile launched from a Reaper drone. Reaper drones, by the way, are made by General Atomics. That is a private company, in case you're an investor watching this. So not one that you could publicly invest in the stock market, although you could always look at things like ArcX, which has a ton of defense stocks in it, like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and things like that. But this is not a stock market video. I just touch on it because I know some folks will think about it. But we're in the situation where Joe Biden says we're going to continue to hunt down ISIS leaders, but I can't help but feel not very comforted when, after the Kabul explosion on Thursday, we've had one entire CIA base destroyed by us and only one reported drone strike that killed 2 ISIS members. And General McKenzie says that this is not the last group that'll be attacked, and the 2 people that we killed may have hurt some capabilities of the Taliban, but those 2 people also didn't have direct links to Thursday's attack. So basically, still haven't found those people with links to Thursday's attack. So in other words, we got Joe Biden and Commander McKenzie talking about more retaliatory strikes, but it's been 2 days and we've only heard about one that killed 2 ISIS members. So to me, this concerns me that we have a massive lack of intelligence in Afghanistan right now, and that continued pain in Afghanistan is just going to lead to more of a not only crisis in Afghanistan, but also a crisis in America. This political crisis is a really big issue. And that's why I started with Nicole. So I don't care if Nicole is a Republican or Democrat. I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. Nicole's dead now because of this disaster. It's so horrible. It's devastating. And now we're becoming even more divided here. We've got 111,900 people evacuated since August 14th. 5,400 Americans, so we're evacuating way more people than just Americans. There are about 350 Americans still left. We do know that Republicans are obviously branding this right now as this is the Biden we told you to expect if you would elect Biden, somebody who's potentially on the weaker side of things. Democrats obviously say that, well, somebody had to pull out. We couldn't stay there forever, and it was going to be tough no matter when the pullout was going to happen. You've even got folks like Madison Cawthorn, a representative, and he wants to invoke the 25th Amendment to replace Joe Biden for being incapable of handling this disaster. Again, more partisanness, which is not a surprise from Madison. Okay, Madison's definitely a little bit more on the right. There's not a lot of there aren't a lot of bipartisan posts on Madison pages. Let's just my goodness. But where I wrap this up is what we have left is a military, an American military, that appears to be trusting the Taliban to fight ISIS. The problem with this is we invaded Afghanistan to fight al-Qaeda, and the Taliban harbored al-Qaeda. Bush said the Taliban will pay the price, and the Taliban ended up unconditionally surrendering in December 2001. Now we have Commander McKenzie saying, we're trusting the Taliban. We're trusting the Taliban to rebuild and provide safety and security and perhaps form a coalition government. This seems backwards to me, especially since it's important to know that, remember when our withdrawal first started and a lot of this panic began, there were so many Taliban members and people in Afghanistan screaming death to Americans that the phrase death to Americans went trending on Twitter. And even though publicly the Taliban leadership that we do talk with have condemned the Kabul attack, it's worth noting that there are still many in the Taliban who are sympathetic with ISIS-K. And the reason for this is people who work in the Sunni Taliban group sometimes change factions and they go over to al-Qaeda, which is also a Sunni group. Or they go over to ISIS, which is also a Sunni group, right? Sectarian violence has been going on in this area for thousands of years. And often what we see is a fight of Sunni Islam versus Shia Islam. And this 1,000-year war, but also Sunni Islam versus just anyone else, the infidels, right? And so really, when you go back to the sectarian roots, you realize that ISIS and the Taliban and al-Qaeda, they're all on the same religious theme. It's not a surprise that there are people in the Taliban who are sympathetic to al-Qaeda and ISIS. And you also see people who get frustrated within the Taliban ranks who end up sort of graduating or moving maybe over to al-Qaeda or ISIS, which is bad because there could always be lingering relations. And then if, let's say, someone from ISIS was coming to a Taliban-controlled checkpoint and the Taliban folks are like, oh, I remember you, and you turn a blind eye. Like, relationships matter, right? And these groups are very connected to each other in ways that we don't want them to be. The United States was and NATO forces were a massive wedge in Afghanistan for these three groups. It's kind of like a cork that was protecting a ship from sinking has now just been removed, and now there's a lot of water coming in, and the ship's hull is fragmenting even more. Now, it's worth noting that some in Afghanistan say the mainstream media is just overblowing this disaster and that Afghans didn't trust their government anyway, so may as well let the Taliban in, who were going to bring safety and security. But I don't know that an uncoordinated Taliban government, or perhaps even some form of coalition government, maybe even with the help of Russia or China or Iran or whatever. I don't even see these three groups coordinating super well, but if they did, somehow there was a coalition government formed in Afghanistan. I mean, I suppose maybe that'd be best case scenario, right? At least there'd be some form of government, but I don't know that this setup will create the opportunity for less bombings or less attacks by ISIS, especially since a goal of forces like ISIS and Al-Qaeda is to create instability or to kill any leftover Americans or infidels or whatever. I don't know that the Taliban are going to be capable of running a form of coalition government. Now, I hope they are. I hope they can provide stability and safety for the people of Afghanistan, especially since they've pledged to let other factions, Shia factions, be and not continue this 1,000-year war plus. And I fear that the more instability we create in Afghanistan, the more our politics in the United States will become more divisive, more divided, and the more our government will actually fail under this horrible partisan bickering nature of government that we have today. I think it's horrible. And so Afghanistan's going to have big political consequences. We'll see how it all unfolds. But I can't say I'm not nervous. Thanks for watching.